Costa Rica has boomed. It's always been booming, but the past couple of years, it has really boomed.
Costa Rica, in many ways, is like very vanilla right now because the quality of life there is better. There's tax incentives. So no tax, but you can get a $100,000 exemption if you live there.
This is going to happen again. We're going to have inflation again. It's coming back. I'm looking at the data, and it's the same, if not worse, than it was when I saw this happen during the COVID era.
There was a crazy murder that happened a couple years ago. A woman was killed, and they found out that there was like this love triangle. Dude, you're back from the land of Pura Vida.
Pura Vida, brother. Yeah, back from Costa Rica. Costa Rica. That's how they say it on the East Coast of the U.S. You been to Costa Rica?
Oh, dude, they do. It's funny. You're tan. You know, you can tell you were at the beach, just getting some waves. How was the surf down there?
Surf was all right. It was kind of stormy, but I have a little bit of an embarrassing story to tell right now. Can I share it with you?
Let's do it.
Okay, I don't want anybody to hear this, but it must have been 2003 or 2004. This is like senior year of high school. My first surf trip was to El Salvador. Don't worry, I'm going to wrap this back to Costa Rica real quick. On like maybe the second or third day there, I get so sick. I mean, sicker than you could possibly even imagine, you know, out both ends, like the craziest workout you could possibly think of. Long story short, on that part of the trip, I recovered, but I had this stomach bug for like, I swear, 6-8 months after that trip. Then I was invincible. I could go to any country. I could go anywhere, eat, drink anything, and I was totally fine. Fast forward to now, 2024 we're in, 20 years later. Holy crap. And I think I got something in Costa Rica. So if I have to get up in the middle of this podcast, you'll know why. The emergency, you know what the emergency is for.
We'll just cut it, and Cody is expelling demons. We'll take a demon break.
Yeah, the Costa Rican version of Montezuma's Revenge.
Well, dude, let's dive into it. I'm excited to kind of catch up because dude, you've been globetrotting, meeting with interesting people. You just got back from your Explorer Summit in Costa Rica, about 30 people down there. And I know you guys did a couple days of like kind of presentations. You did some surfing, hiking, a bunch of stuff down there. And yeah, today what we want to talk a little bit about is like, first of all, like dive into a little bit of like what Costa Rica is like today, why it's interesting, because I don't know about everyone listening, but and about you. My neighbor spends half his time in Costa Rica. I have multiple friends who have like moved down there part-time, and there's a bunch of interesting stuff going on in Costa Rica. So we're going to dive into that and then also talk about some of the interesting opportunities that were presented during your event down there. So
Yeah, I'm excited actually to talk about Costa Rica.
Yeah,
because it's kind of like a vanilla destination. And like when you think of Costa Rica, you're not thinking like, oh, I'm going to, you know, Morocco or you know, some exotic surf location or anything. It's kind of like, oh yeah, that's a totally normal destination for if you're in the US.
It's become that way for sure. Yeah. It's become like, it's like in a sense, I think of Costa Rica now as easier than Mexico.
Absolutely. And it's interesting. My heart and soul is in California, but I live in Florida right now. And the flight was less than 3 hours, direct flight to Costa Rica. So in terms of ease to get to another world, waves, beautiful country and all that, it's super easy. The flight wasn't bad at all. But so I like to say there's like 4 or 5 people that go to Costa Rica. And I'm going to try and list them right now. There's the guy or gal who's having like their early midlife crisis and wants to get their yoga certification.
Oh yeah.
There's the guy or gal who's having their real midlife crisis and is going to take ayahuasca. There is the surfer. There is the retiree who wants to see all the hummingbirds and toucans. Oh, and then last on the list, and this is never talked about, it's the felon. It's the person who ran into legal trouble in the US and they're going there. And they're not necessarily like a bad person. They just can't get hired or they can't like establish a career in the US. And they're going there to kind of reinvent themselves.
Okay. Insane story about this. One of my friends here in Austin is in the biking community, the like cycling community. and there was a crazy murder that happened. A woman was killed, and they found out that kind of very quickly, they unraveled it. There was like this love triangle that was happening. And I said, my friend, it was a friend. The couple was friends with my friend, and this ex-girlfriend, I can't remember exactly, either the girlfriend or the ex-girlfriend killed one of the women in the love triangle and then fled the country. And she was on the run. Nobody knew where she was, but like it was very clear. It became clear very quickly that she was the one that did it. She was on some cameras, stuff like that. Where do they find her?
Costa Rica.
Costa Rica, Santa Teresa, teaching yoga. First of all, not the right place to go, considering that half the people in Santa Teresa are from Austin, Texas, and are there half the time. So you leave Austin to the most vanilla place. Anyway, to your point about the felon, real.
Well, maybe that's a good place to start. And I know we're kind of joking about this, but that's not the main theme, but it's definitely like an underlying theme in a lot of the expat communities in Latin America. And I've been going to Costa Rica now for 20 years, and I wouldn't claim to be an expert there, but I've been to almost all the surf towns, and every single one, especially like 10, 15 years ago, there's a side of these towns that's bad. There's big drug problems. There's big theft. There's always that kind of random dude or gal who's nuts, and somebody thinks they murdered somebody back in the US, and they're living in some jungle, like a yurt up on the mountain. And again, I'm kind of laughing about this, but I can think of multiple stories just like the one you told of stuff going down in Costa Rica. And so I'll give one quick story. When I went to Pavones the first time, this is almost 20 years ago. This is the very, very southern end of the island, or of the country. And for anybody listening, there's a great book called In Search of Captain Zero. It's a surfing book, and it's of this guy looking for his friend. And I won't ruin the book, but he eventually finds his friend, and it's the most, the biggest letdown you can possibly think of. But part of the book takes place in Pavones, and in Pavones, they had this big problem. Pavones, by the way, is a left-hand point break surfing, one of the longest left-hand point breaks in the world, one of the best waves, if not the best wave in Costa Rica. And there was this big meth problem there with a bunch of meth addicts that moved up into the mountains, and they were like causing havoc. And anyways, the book In Search of Captain Zero, it talks about it a little bit, but 15, 20 years ago when I was there, it was the real deal. Like you had to be careful. I got all my board shorts stolen. Someone backed into my rental car. Someone tried to fight me on the way. It was just one of those crazy places. So Costa Rica's matured a lot since then, but it definitely still has that element. And
yeah, I think it's interesting on the development curve. We've talked about Guyana. We've talked about some other things happening in South America. I think of like Nicaragua right now is like, okay, what was Costa Rica like 20, 25 years ago? And you'll just see that kind of progression. And we talked at the beginning, like Costa Rica in many ways is like very vanilla right now because it's for the most part safe. I know many people who have just decided that the quality of life there is better. There's tax incentives, which we'll dive into. So I want to get into like some interesting, let's kind of kick it off and dive into some of the interesting things that let's dive into the Costa Rica digital nomad visa, because this is a very interesting thing. You've like learned a little bit more about it. So what does that mean? Because this is completely aligned with what we're talking about people who've chosen to move down there because of quality of life.
Yeah. And so just as you mentioned, Costa Rica has boomed. It's always been booming, but the past couple of years, it has really boomed. And people have moved down there full time. I even know some people here in Florida who have decided to spend half the year down there. They take their kids. There's legit international schools for kids down there that are accredited, have great teachers. There are a ton of digital nomads down there. There are some real estate prices that would, make your eyes pop. And so this digital nomad visa that they just released came out in 2022. So 2 years ago. Typically takes a couple years for these visas to kind of get momentum. So it's relatively new. And I don't want to say for sure, but you can kind of guess what happened is the Costa Rican government during COVID, they stayed open. The country stayed open most of the time. And they had an amazing influx of people that fled Europe, Canada, all these places that were locked down. They're like, hey, I'm not going to be locked down. I want to live my life. I want to be in the jungle. I want to live this clean life. And I think a lot of people want to get back to nature. So Costa Rica boomed during this time. And the government there said, well, hey, like, why would we turn these people away who are making money outside the country, but they're living here and spending it within the country? Like, how can we make this more hospitable to them? So
let's let the good times roll.
Yeah, let's suck the money out of these gringos while they're here. So they produced this new visa. So what it is it's a 1-year visa for a digital nomad. You have to prove that you make $3,000 a year if you're single, or $4,000
a year or a month.
Sorry, a month. $3,000 a month if you're single, $4,000 a month if you're married. You have to prove that your business is doing business outside of the U.S. So you have to prove that your clientele or
outside of the U.S. or outside of Costa Rica.
I'm butchering this. Outside of Costa Rica.
Okay.
So you have to show essentially that you're making $3,000 a month as a person living in Costa Rica, but you're generating that income from outside of the country. You can do this with pretty much any nationality. It's open to so many nationalities. It's not even worth mentioning. It's a huge list. And if you're there for 180 days in the first year, they'll reissue you another year on top of that, effectively giving you 2 years to be in Costa Rica. And you don't get taxed. They're not charging you any tax at all. Again, they just want you there spending money and paying rent or buying real estate.
So no tax. Unfortunately, if you're a U.S. citizen, you're still taxed.
Correct.
But you can get a $100,000 exemption, I guess, if you live there.
The FEIE, the Foreign Earned Income Exclusion. I think it's like $220,000 a year if you're married.
Is it for a family now?
Yeah, I think so. And then anything over that $200,000, you're taxed on. But it's a pretty sweet deal. If you're living in the U.S., when you go live in Costa Rica, you're living almost tax-free for a family.
Super interesting. So that's great. And I think we're seeing this trend. I mean, the same thing's happening. Thailand also implemented one. And what I've noticed is it's kind of like they're just starting to bring in people from other countries as well. It used to, I mean, it's been fairly easy. I've traveled a bunch, lived in different countries, done the visa run of like you leave, you come back. And it seems like a lot of the trend right now is to make it easier with these digital nomad visas to stick around for like 6 months.
Absolutely.
Months, a year.
And in Costa Rica in particular, in Asia, if you're in Hong Kong or Singapore or really anywhere in Asia, it's easier to take a visa run. Really cheap flights, go in and out for a day. But in Costa Rica, a lot of the surf towns or cool areas you want to be are like 7 hours, 8-hour drive from the airport. Hard. So to do a visa run, and then if you even get to the airport, it's an expensive flight out. So it's kind of a pain in the butt to do a visa run in Latin America, specifically Central America. So yeah, this new digital nomad visa that Costa Rica has issued is super attractive. And if you're in the U.S. looking at high quality of life with a breathtaking background, I mean, Costa Rica is pretty hard to beat.
For sure. And I want to talk a little bit more about also like dive into the conference. So you go down there, you're telling me that you had like basically a good chunk of a resort, right? Like, or like it was kind of more like an all exclusive, family friendly type resort.
Yeah. Yeah. All inclusive. So we didn't exclude anybody, but it was all inclusive.
Yeah. All inclusive.
Yeah. So I've done events all around the world. And for anybody listening who's never been to one of the events I put on, I usually pick an interesting location. We've done stuff in the past in Kyiv, Ukraine. This is before everything happened there. I've done stuff in Hong Kong, Italy, all over the place. And we typically say, hey, we're going to be in the city center, and we set up a bunch of dinners at random restaurants, and we meet up and explore different things and have fun. This was the first event I've done at an all-inclusive resort. So for me, as the kind of event producer, it was super easy because everything was included. Yeah, but even easier was that nobody had to leave the resort. So it was your brain, other than talking to everybody, was pretty much turned off. So it was a great experience. We stayed near the Tamarindo area. So if you're familiar with that, we flew into Liberia, which is one of their international airports. It's in the north part of the country.
Dude, direct flight from Austin.
Yeah.
I think it's like 2 hours and 45 minutes or something absurd like that now.
Yep.
It's not every single day. There's still, I think it's twice a week, but that is, it's crazy. Coming from the Northwest, I grew up in, Pacific Northwest. Everything except Hawaii feels far away in terms of like the tropics. Anything in Mexico, Florida is insanely far away. And like the only benefit of being up there is like Hawaii's significantly closer. And one of my favorite parts about being in Central Texas is like you can just launch directly into Mexico. It's so easy. And then all the way down to Costa Rica, and all these direct flights just made it so easy.
Yeah. And from Florida, Texas, and most of the US, again, direct flights to that. The capital of Costa Rica is San Jose. And from San Jose to the beaches or the coast, it's a little bit of a drive. If you fly to Liberia, which is in the north part of the country, it's half hour to the beach. So you're in the US to a Costa Rican beach with under 4 hours, rental car, everything included. Like you're there.
It's easier
quick.
for me to get to the beach in Costa Rica than it is for me to get to the beach in most parts of the country, right? It's definitely easier than getting to like any of the beaches in like the Carolinas, right? Mm-hmm. It's way easier to Costa Rica. It'd be probably even easier than Florida or close, almost the same.
Yeah. And that's an interesting trend that I think we have a long way to go as it pertains to the Mexican, Costa Rican, and even Panama to a lesser extent. These towns on the coastlines in these countries are so influenced by the US and Canada in terms of who's living there full time now. It's when you land in these towns, it's almost like, whoa, I'm in a different country, but everyone speaks English there. It's dollarized. Everyone's using US dollars. It's pretty expensive, but quality of life is super high. Yeah. It's safe. Things work. And I feel like I'm in the US. I'm just in a different country. It's very strange, but it's happening more and more. It feels like.
I met a guy at an event I was at who pretty well-known business dude, had a big exit like 10 years ago. And he's lived in Costa Rica for, I think like 8 years, and maybe less, maybe like 5 years. And he's like, my kids go to school with Tom and Giselle's kids. That's like, and he's like, we've got a full on school compound down there. And yeah, I mean, that's like, those are the type of people that are down there as well. You've got, what's his name? Bitcoin Twitter founder. He's down there.
Jack Dorsey.
Jack Dorsey's down there. Anyway, yeah, it's definitely an interesting place. So you bring all these people down there. People are giving some presentations. Mm-hmm. Walk me through like what was one of the more interesting conversations and presentations that people gave at the conference.
Yeah, and I think anybody who's been to a conference knows that the most important parts of a conference aren't typically during presentations. It's late at night or in between sessions or the lunch or coffee break you have, the random person you meet with and are able to talk with one-on-one. And I've tried to make the events that I put on in the past facilitate that. And I think this event, especially because we were in this resort where everyone was just hanging out, it was even more so that. So I would say that the private conversations were probably the best, but they were obviously catalyzed by the presentations that we had. And so one of the presentations we had was from my really good buddy who I worked with as a firefighter. This is back when I was a firefighter in California. He's now a captain paramedic, still as a firefighter, but he also founded a nonprofit called Proof of Workforce. His name's Dom Bay, and his mission, other than being a firefighter, is to onboard pensions and unions to Bitcoin.
Cool.
It's so cool. And so his claim to fame right now, other than being a smart dude who's ahead of the curve on a lot of things, he's onboarded 4 different fire departments to self-custody their own Bitcoin for their pension purposes. And he's now in talks with some super high level governments internationally and within the US. And when I say high level, I'm talking like the highest of the highest level. And he's quickly positioned himself to be a person to bring Bitcoin to the masses. And he's doing a great job. And he gave a great presentation there. And man, the conversations that came for that were just incredible.
This is so interesting to me because I've been excited about Bitcoin for a long time. And one of the criticisms for years has been, how are you going to get the pensions on it, the institutional investors, the people that are typically buying like mutual funds, ETFs. And there's just so much money that flows from those large, those groups into, let's say, mutual funds. And they're obviously looking for a better return. And then they can look back over the last 10 years and be like, what's the best asset to hold? The best asset to hold over the last 10 years has been Bitcoin. There's just nothing compares to it. So it's cool to see it happening, right? It's like,
Absolutely.
This has always been the theory that it's going to trickle over, and then there's going to be this kind of tipping point where pension funds, education fund, like Harvard, they're all going to start buying it, and then they'll start buying it big, and then countries will buy it. So
yeah, and it's not just the price appreciation of Bitcoin and crypto that is interesting. It's actually the self-custody aspect of it. And what that really means is if you're a salaried employee and your money is going towards a retirement account or some sort of pension system, you are giving all of your trust in that manager of the pension system. And the largest pension system in the US is CalPERS, California Public Employee Retirement System. They have been managing money in an atrocious manner the past several years. Even in a bull market, it's terrifying how bad they've been at it. And they will be insolvent within the next decade or two if they don't turn their strategy around. But the point is that if you are a retiree, and especially a public employee in California, you have no choice. You have to contribute to that account. In fact, when I was a firefighter, that it was mandated. Not mandated. They just take it out of your paycheck, and it goes towards.
It's done before you even see it. You never see it, right?
And they have lost billions of dollars on stupid private equity, venture capital plays, funding stuff that doesn't even make sense. And I could, I'm already getting like high blood pressure thinking about it. But the point is, with these unions self-custodying Bitcoin, it's only a small percentage of their retirement money that they're taking out. They're custodying themselves and just saying, hey, yes, we still need a retirement fund. We still need all this help for when we retire, but like we're taking some of this accountability into our own hands, and we're going to self-custody some of our wealth in Bitcoin. And if the pension system does have issues in the future, hopefully we will have our own crypto that we've self-custodied to have for retirement. So who knows what will happen 20 years from now? But I have a feeling that Dom, who's founded Proof of Workforce, is going to do some very good things for these pensions and unions.
It's super interesting. I know you had Felipe Pomar, who I'm interested in what you learned from him. He was the world's first surfing champion, still surfs big waves at 80. I know one of the things he talked about was kind of his longevity regime. You've met him before, surfed together before. I'm just interested, like, what were some of the things that he talked about?
So I first met Felipe because he reached out to me from my writing, and when I saw the email come in, I was like, oh my God, is this Felipe Pomar? Like the Felipe Pomar? And everyone listening is probably like, who the hell is this guy? He was the world's first surfing champion. And so if you're a surfer, read any surfing books, his name comes up a lot. So when I received the email, I was like, oh my God, this is like a living legend. I'll do anything to hang out with this dude. And so I've surfed with him on the North Shore of Kauai in Honolulu Bay. And when I went there to go surf with him, this is probably like 5-6 years ago. He was like 75, 76 at the time. It was big. It was like, I don't know. I mean, Hawaiian size is like 8 foot, but like 8 foot Hawaiian's like 20 foot California. It was big. And I was on a step up gun, and I was like, I got a couple. And then like you see Felipe at 75 just screaming across these, triple overhead waves. You're like, holy crap, this guy is, he's 75, but he's in life threatening surf, and he's doing great. So that was my first trip with him. And my second trip, I went to Peru with him. And he's originally from Peru. He's Peruvian, and he's like a national icon in the country. And in between surf sessions, we went to this like outdoor kind of workout area. And at this point, he's like 78, and he's just like starts busting up pull-ups, like full on, like legit, like pull-ups. I'm like, oh my God, I've never seen a guy at 78 doing just busting up pull-ups. So he was there, and he shared his longevity regime, which of course had to do with diet and sleep, all the things that you would think of. And this is funny. One of the mornings of our conference, it was like workout with Felipe at 7 a.m. at the beach. And we're at this resort, and there's a nice beach there. And so not the entire group, I'd say like a third, maybe a quarter of the group showed up. I mean, 7 a.m. in the morning at this beach. And I thought we were going to like stretch with Felipe. I thought this was going to be like, touch your toes, do a little like good mornings. And he proceeds to give this talk to us about how mitochondria gets stimulated from high intensity interval training, HIIT workouts. And I'm like, oh shit, like what are we doing here?
He's about to murder you.
Yeah. So he's like, all right, everybody line up. Again, he's 80 right now. And he draws 2 lines in the sand, like one line and another line, like half a football field away. And he's having us do like wind sprints in the soft sand. And I'm all right with this. I typically run on the beach, but most people are like, are you what? Like there's this 80-year-old guy making us do wind sprints in soft sand, and he's all right with us. Yeah, he's jogging in the soft sand right there next to us. He was all about it. So it was inspiring.
I think that's like, I just see that more and more with people who are really fit at an old age. They just don't stop.
Yeah, if I would say the number one thing,
what they were doing.
Yeah.
At a younger age until they're older.
The number one thing about him is he's just like super stubborn in a good way. Yeah. And he just doesn't stop. And maybe that's the key to longevity and old age, living to a healthy old age is just keeping that mindset where you just keep go. And he's still fit. He's running. He's doing great. And that was the health side of Felipe's presentation there. And Costa Rica was like, kicking our ass in the soft sand. It was amazing.
Yeah, it's interesting that I read a story about a guy who was kind of famous. I think it was in the Palm Springs area because I was visiting my grandfather. He lived in Palm Desert, and there was a story that I was reading in the newspaper about this 95-year-old who every single day like hiked this really big mountain, and he became kind of a legend because he's doing it every single day. And it was the exact same advice from him. They're like, how have you been how do you continue to do this? And he's like, well, I just never stopped. He's like, I've been hiking this for 30 years. And the day that I stop hiking it is the day that I stop hiking it for good. And so I'm just not going to stop. I'm just going to continue to do it. And I love that. It's so simple and powerful. So I agree with you. You talk about conferences, all the value comes at like the bar, the dinners, all these different things. So what were some of the interesting conversations you had that were like separate from, the presentations?
Yeah. So the group was very diverse. We had people from the US, a couple of people flying from Asia, Europe, all over the place. And when you bring a group like that together, you start to hear some really interesting stories. So I'll name 2 quick things I can think of. One was this guy who moved to China and
Western guy.
He's actually from Los Angeles area, and totally by coincidence, I have like mutual friends when I grew up. I never met him, but I don't even know how he ended up back at my conference. It was one of those like 6 degrees of separation things. So anyways, he's an American, moved to China, started a company where he imports European and American made brands, some luxury, but just like well-made brands, imports them into China and then sells them in the Chinese market. So it's, I call it like the reverse Chinese hustle. And he has a warehouse there, and it's like a pretty major company. He does very well. And he was explaining to us how he does this. And it's exactly as it sounds. It's just reverse what you think of. So he's importing these great brands into China, and the Chinese are like, wow, made in USA pants or blender or like shampoo, whatever it is. And he sells it to the local Chinese market, and he crushes it. So that was one of the, and I would say this business idea, I want to come back. I want to interview the guy. Actually, we should bring him on the podcast.
I think that'd be great. I have another person who's doing something similar. I met when I was in LA. I don't think it's the same person, but their thesis is they live in China, and they bring their big thesis is basically that Erewhon market and everything in Erewhon is the most desirable thing in China in 10 years. And so they're effectively like, they're just bringing the stuff that's sold in Erewhon, like the health, the fitness stuff, all that stuff to China and selling it. And they're doing really well.
Yeah. And I think that, of course, China's the most obvious because the world has been for so long taking things out of China. And now we're like, oh, they're a consumer nation. Now we can send things back to them. Yeah. And then my mind starts to go, I'm like India is next up, right? India is the one that, they're increasing their exports, but they're going to have this rising middle upper class that's going to be consuming all these branded products. And what are they going to consume? Probably a lot of Western brands that you can export to them.
they're still seeing Western movies, right?
Yeah.
And the greatest trick we ever ran was exporting our culture through Hollywood. Again, not a monopoly on it anymore, because there's other film studios, and Bollywood has their own, film studios. But at the core, right, like exporting consumerism is a Hollywood. It's been from
It's the number one export of the U.S.
Angeles.
Entertainment. It's the number one export, and I don't think that trend will die for. Or maybe it will eventually, but the number one export of the U.S. is entertainment, and of course, it's influenced the lifestyle and consumerism habits of much of the world. So yeah, that was a really interesting one. Another interesting one that I have never heard of, and this is kind of like that Iridium conversation we had on a previous podcast, talking about like weird investments. This guy, his name's NJ. I'm giving NJ a shout out. He's been to a lot of our events, and he was talking about investing in synthetic diamonds. And everyone's heard of this. You could buy a new engagement ring and you buy this huge rock for your fiance, and it's synthetic, and no one knows it's synthetic because it's literally the same thing as an actual diamond. And there's the whole ethical thing that you're, I guess, circumventing, which is like the blood diamonds from Africa and all that. But his investment thesis is that there's these specific types of diamonds, depending on their colors, that are better or worse or specialized for super high-end electronic hardware. And these diamonds have certain cooling properties and conductivity properties. And we're not talking like, diamonds for rings. We're talking about like smaller ones. And his thesis is that, hey, if you invest in these synthetic diamond producers now, they're going to be able to produce these diamonds for hardware, electronic hardware, and they're going to be using these diamonds for high-end processing, all this like crazy sophisticated stuff. And that's not even including the industrial use cases of diamonds for like saws and stuff that cut concrete. And so he's on this mission to invest in synthetic diamond makers. And for me, I'm like, duh, of course, data processing, supercomputing, Bitcoin mining, all that stuff, it's going to get more and more and more. And they're going to use, rare diamonds. So I thought that was a super interesting one.
That is really interesting. I know you're telling me a little bit about this, about inflation, right? And that there's somebody who's like kind of a big exporter. Talk about inflation and like what were some of the predictions that came out of this?
Yeah, I can't name his name because of who he was, but I'm actually shocked that he was even at the conference. Let's just say he was a major exporter within the U.S. So he exports things from the U.S. And when I say major, just think, anyway. He predicted during COVID, right before we had inflation, he was spot on about the incoming inflation we would have based on what he was seeing with exports. Because the U.S. can export all kinds of stuff, but a lot of that is predicated on what our currency value is compared to other currencies. Yeah. Because if the dollar is stronger or weaker, foreign countries are more or less incentivized to do trade with us. So back prior to the U.S. experiencing inflation, he saw this coming. He saw this coming a year in advance because he saw what the export trends were. He saw this coming and he positioned himself to do very well. Now, his main business is exporting, so that's how he generated all his wealth, which was a lot. And he wasn't a presenter at the event. He was just a guest there. He spoke up during one of the conversations when it was like, hey, this is going to happen again. We're going to have inflation again. It's coming back. And he goes, I know this because I'm looking at the data and it's the same, if not worse, than it was when I saw this happen during the COVID era of this first inflationary spike.
So walk through the impact of what that looks like, right? First of all, for him, right, as an exporter.
Yep. So we'll do him and then after. So for him, obviously, if the U.S. dollar becomes stronger, and by the way, there was an article published in Bloomberg yesterday, 2 days ago, about the dollar, how strong it is right now. Yeah. As the dollar gets stronger, it's great because we have great purchasing power in the U.S., but
it's bad for an exporter.
Yeah, it's bad because people outside the U.S. don't want to buy U.S. things because they're expensive. So for him, it's going to hit exporting and volume for him because there's going to be less stuff being exported. So
but connect the dots here on why inflation in the U.S. leads to a dollar that is stronger than other currencies.
Right. And this is this is going to be kind of complex, but I think the easiest way to think about this is that all of fiat currencies are fake currencies. I don't mean fake as in they don't exist. I just mean that they're manipulated by a central bank. They are increased or decreased in volume based upon how an economy is going. Right now, we have higher inflation, so we need higher rates to combat that inflation.
Yeah.
As rates go up, more people want to have that currency that has a higher rate because they'll generate a higher rate of return. So rates just a short while ago were 0% in the US. So putting your money in a bank was like, no, don't do that. Put it in stocks. That's why we saw a huge spike in the stock market. Well, when inflation hit, they raised rates because that's how you combat inflation. So people say, I want to hold cash now, but I'll put the cash in an interest-bearing account. Well, it's not just people in the US that do that. It's other people too. I want to hold
people in Japan who have 0% interest rates right now and have a lot of wealth. They're like, well, I could keep it in Japan or risk-free, the risk-free rate of whatever they're getting, 5% in the US. Yeah, that's a good example of like shifting the money directly to the US. And then because they're buying US dollars.
Yep. And there, it's not just individuals, say in Japan. I mean, it is individual traders, but it's actual. I mean, it totally is. You're right. It's definitely individual investors that are doing this, but it's also like countries that are converting their reserves to say US dollar because they can get a good return. Well, the result of that is it strengthens the power of the currency. And this is in relation to other currencies.
Yes.
So even though all fiat currencies may not be the best tool out there for like compared to hard money, say like gold, silver, or Bitcoin, the reality is that the US dollar is still the heavyweight in the world. And so this strengthening dollar has made US exports more expensive, which again is going to slow down these exports. And it's like this vicious feedback loop because then it's going to like, prevent exports from happening, which is going to do this more, inflation, which is going to make us do higher rates. And it's just like this crazy feedback loop. And we'll see how the government combats this. But in the short term for investors who are saying like, what's the forecast for the next year? Here's a dude who is a major exporter from the US. And he's telling us right now that the same thing is about to happen that just happened several years ago. And, do I know personally the data? No, I don't know. I didn't see it. I'm just taking his word for it. But I don't think he had any reason to not tell us the truth.
No, and this is like where I keep coming back to like the value of getting on a plane and going and having conversations with people. It's like these side conversations that lead to very interesting takeaways, right? And you can kind of listen to a podcast, but it's also same thing when we were in Guyana, right? Some of the more interesting conversations ended up being side conversations talking about, what it's like to do business in Guyana, from people who are actually on the ground, in the oil industry, in construction, sharing like what it's actually like,
absolutely,
and what they expect, right? You can't get that information. I think it's also on this like high inflation, strengthening of the US dollar, like all the consequences of that. I think it's very interesting because that's a contrarian take to what generally people think right now is going to happen. They think like, all right, maybe they think, okay, the rates aren't going to be lowered this year, or maybe consensus is like one rate cut this year, something like that. But the reality is if inflation is persistent, they're just not going to cut rates.
Absolutely. And it's not just what you said. I mean, that's a big part of it, meaning combating inflation. How are we going to control rates? There's also this, there's a politicized part of it too. I'm just going to say it. No one wants to talk about it, but this is an election year. So the people in office right now are very motivated to keep the economy strong. They're motivated in general. It doesn't matter left, right, center. Like everybody wants to get into
no, but they're making a case right now for re-election, and they have a certain number of months to make that case. And
absolutely,
the strongest case they can make is people feeling wealthier, right?
Yep. And the way you make people feel wealthier is to have an economy not only working, but things to be cheaper. And when you have, rates going up, dollar strengthening, you may feel like rich on paper, but what ultimately happens, and the US has battled with this for a long time, and Japan battled with this for 2 decades. That's why their stock market had been flat forever. which is their domestic economy doing pretty well, but international trade being pretty difficult because they're battling all these other countries that are able to have weaker currencies and do trade much more efficiently. So
for sure, and that's the whole argument against China manipulating their own currency. They manipulate their currency to make it artificially weak to be able to stimulate the exports. And that's so very, very interesting. And I think we'll probably dive more into this conversation is like, it's just going to be relevant this year going into the election. Inflation is on everyone's mind. And it's also one of those things that it is complicated because everything is relative. And what I mean by that is we've got the only lens that you really can share is the lens of, for us, we live in America. We travel a lot, but we live in America. And our lens is that of what we've experienced as Americans. Again, our currency has gotten stronger. For the most part, the US has done pretty well comparatively to other countries, and they're still having challenges. And we've been able to, like, in a sense, export a lot of this. When I export a lot of the inflation abroad, and other countries are feeling it even more than we are. So my whole point of this is that it's a very complicated topic because it is relative everywhere. And how you're feeling is the only lens you can really experience through is your day-to-day experience. And when you go to the grocery store, our eggs $10 now, right? Or whatever it is. And so I think we'll dive more into it, but it's very interesting to hear from somebody like that who's on the front lines.
And he's not incentivized. And again, like you said, when I say we, our podcast, we're gonna do an event one of these days. So I'm excited to include everybody on some of these trips sometime to have some of these private conversations. But the guy who shared this, first of all, he's extremely wealthy. He has no motivation to tell us this, and he'll probably reposition himself to do something creative out of this market to make money. But to hear someone on the inside saying, hey, this is coming, it's super interesting. And I just wanted to add that a contrarian take to all of this, or a take that people don't like, is that if this happens, which is the dollar strengthening and it becoming more difficult for us to do trade and all these trickle down, they will print more US dollars. And that has been the concern forever, that the US monetary scheme is getting out of control and we're going to have rampant inflation and the US dollar is going to crash and on and on and on. And me personally, I'm very pro sound money. I'm pro gold, silver, crypto, all of that. And I look at the US dollar and I go, oh my God, I want to tear my hair out. But then I hear this stuff. I'm like, wait, if that happens, if the government does intervene and start printing more money, the Fed and the Treasury start going on this rampant craziness of injecting more liquidity into the system, guess what's going to happen? Stocks are going to go up. Crypto is going to go up. All these things are going to go up that we think are going to crash. So that's kind of the contrarian take on all of this, is like, it looks bad and it could get bad, but if they intervene to provide more money, a lot of those hard assets and stocks,
more speculative assets are going to rip.
Going to rip again. And no one's thinking that right now. Like Nvidia, it's like $3 trillion. Its a market cap is literally about to overtake the entire GDP of France, which is the 7th largest economy in the world right now. Like, what? That's a private, like, how is that possible? How can Nvidia go up anymore? I don't know where it's going to go, but if we have more money printing, like, it could go up a lot more.
And it just goes back to, like, such a key component of what is happening right now, which is you need to be an owner, right? You need to be an owner of something. Equities. I think also, like, housing is another example where the housing market sucks right now. It just sucks. Everything about it sucks. But there is a future where it doesn't suck because, again, it's going to be tied in a sense to all of the second order consequences of speculative assets ripping is people feeling that they have more purchasing power and converting that into real estate. And again, that whole cycle played out all in COVID, where, at one point my wife and I were looking for a new house, and we went to go right peak COVID, look at some new properties. And there was lines of 40 plus people to go into an open house moving to Austin, Texas. And I'm not saying that that's going to happen again. It's just like you have to continue to go through the sequence of what happens if something opposite of what we expect happens. And that's the fun part of it.
Yeah. And housing, stocks, crypto, they'll all rip eventually once this new monetary policy takes place. And again, I don't know when it's going to happen. It will eventually. But yeah, being an owner
I think it rips if Trump gets elected too, Oh
yeah. If Trump, I mean, it's like what happened in 2016. People didn't think that stocks would rip after 2016. Of course they ripped because they knew he was pro-business. And the business owners and the people with money knew that. And they went, all right, let's go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the main things he talked about, like whether or not you believe what he says, which is a real question. But he was on All In Podcast, was talking about one of his main things was regulation, right? Like the cutting regulation and making it easier to do business. And yeah, so who knows? It's a very interesting thing. And again, back to like the side conversation, everyone's kind of making a calculus and educated bets on the future. And it's always good to have people who you got to look for an edge, and somebody who's a major exporter has an edge in information. I remember one of the times when I felt like I had the best edge of any trade that I've done was when Barstool Sports got bought by Penn. My roommate in college was from Boston, was like one of the, reading Barstool Sports super early on and turned me on to it. And so I'd kind of followed loosely and I'd seen their growth. And the moment that happened, I was like, people don't understand how much of a powerhouse Barstool Sports Media is and how passionate their fans are. Partnering with a casino, they're just going to get all their fans to like sign up and use it and use their betting app. And so I immediately went and I bought a little bit of Penn stock, and then it went to like nothing because right during when COVID hit, I think Penn went down to like $4. I might be off by a little bit, but it dropped like crazy. And I was like, this is insane. I'm loading up. And so I bought, I say loading up, it was still speculative. I think I bought like 15 grand or something like that. I was just like, I'm going to buy. I wish I had just larger balls and I just, would have gone all in, but it went up like 8x over a period of like a year and a half. It was crazy. It was one of the best trades, but it was just like that fact of having different information.
Yeah. That was the COVID times too. Everyone's brains are scrambled, and it's a perfect example. Like the real estate, you said, like people are freaked out. So like, I got to put my wealth in real estate. And that's why it had lines out the door, but that's also why people were selling off stocks that like Penn or other things. Remember when oil crashed?
Like thinking back, it was so like at the time I was like, what's going to happen? Like 15 grand. I'm like, I should have put way more in, as I had a lot of certainty, but there was just so much uncertainty at that time, and you can't replicate that feeling. So,
but that's why it's good to be around other people. And like the event I just put on Costa Rica, where you have these thinkers who not only are able to see through all the fugazi in the moment, they're able to see through all that BS in a highly stressful or confusing time, but they're also able to come up with creative ways of exploiting certain situations. And when you're around a group of people that are able to interpret things going on in the world in a different way and then know how to take action on that, it's extremely beneficial to you as a person, because you're essentially surrounding yourself with these peers that are bringing you up. And in Costa Rica, we experienced a lot of that. A quick side note about Costa Rica, I didn't get to talk about before, just to go back to the country itself. It's expensive there. Yeah. And when we landed in the airport on the way out to the coast, there's always billboards, just like there always has been in Costa Rica. But one billboard stood out in particular. It was like 2 and 3 bedroom condos, and it was a luxury building starting at 1.8 million. And I was like, whoa, like holy smokes.
Yeah.
And Costa Rica has gotten super expensive. So it was beautiful, and I have no complaints about us being there. but this influx of expats or visitors or digital nomads or whatever you're calling them has essentially made most of the beach towns there U.S. prices, if not higher, which was wild. And I hope the Costa Ricans are benefiting from that. I think they generally are.
Yeah.
But I wanted to mention that because there was an article, I'm not sure, it was a couple months ago. It was basically, the title was like, I'm a retiree in Costa Rica and now I have to move back to the U.S. because it's too expensive here. And I could totally see that happening. You went to Costa Rica because you think it's going to be cheap. You get there and go, wait, this is like just as much as the U.S. And again, I hope the Costa Ricans are benefiting from that, but definitely wanted to point that out.
Yeah, it's very.
So it happens with a strong U.S. dollar.
What's what?
That's what happens with a strong U.S. dollar.
It's what happens with a strong U.S. dollar, and it also happens. I partly believe because of the incredible propaganda campaign that's been run against Mexico for decades, because Mexico is a wonderful, wonderful place, and it is much safer than people think that it is. And I bring that up because, I think it's unevenly distributed. The people go into Costa Rica for a lifestyle that is, previously cheaper, but a better lifestyle, because Mexico also has so many incredible things going for it. But Costa Rica just broke through, and they won the propaganda war to attract people that go down there. And when Americans find something that is safe and cool, they just flood it, right? And
Costa Rica's walked that line very well, and they've done it for decades now. They've prioritized preserving their natural beauty, probably more than any other country, maybe in the world. And they've somehow been able to walk this line where they make tourists very happy. They can provide for their local economy and citizens, and somehow navigate the geopolitical world of always staying like somewhat neutral the entire way, and being open to all these countries. And the other visa that just opened up for Costa Rica, this is recently, maybe a month ago, Costa Rica just introduced a visa-free travel for 150 countries. So this isn't the digital nomad visa. This is for 150 countries. You can just land there. You don't even need a visa. You're just welcome to come on in, because they want those tourism dollars.
Costa Rica, open to do business, baby. Absolutely. That's what they want. Awesome. Hey, great recap, man. It was good to reconnect and hear a little bit about this time down in Costa Rica. Fun place to go. If you guys like this episode, truly the best thing that you can possibly do is share it with a friend, write a review, and subscribe on either Apple, Spotify, or YouTube, or all three. We are definitely trying to grow, and your help and your support doing those things is the best way to help us. So we'll see you on the next episode.